What's up guys, and welcome back to Madman Music. Today is a really exciting day for me because we're going to talk about one of my favorite amps of all time. If not my very favorite amp of all time. In fact, I would say this is my favorite amp of all time. There's no other amp on the planet that I think works better for me than the EVH 5153 50 watt Mark II. I'm going to explain to you why I love this amp, all the things that you can do with it, and why you should love it too. Let's get into it. Alright guys, welcome back. Thanks for stopping back by. Today, again, is really exciting for me because I love this amp. It's one of my favorite amps of all time. I've played a ton of amps. All kinds of amps. Any kind of real mainstream high gain amp that's out there, I've tried it. And none of them have touched how flexible and how useful this is for me personally. And then on top of that, like the icing and the cherry on top, the sound of this amp, the EVH sound, just does it for me. It is the tone that I love. I will probably never find another amp that really satisfies me the way that this one does. This amp does everything that I need it to do and more. Like, even in the recording environment where you would generally want a bunch of different tonalities from other types of amps, I can pull off basically everything that I need right here in one package. So that's pretty awesome, and I love it. I am an endorsed EVH artist, and with good reason. Again, I cannot say enough good stuff about these amps. Now, there's a few different variations of this amp. There's the 15 watt lunchbox, which I've done a video on. You can check that out up top. There's also the 100 watt, which I've owned in the past, and it's just a huge monstrosity of an amp. It's awesome, but it's just way too big. There's also some different versions that have different tonalities, like the EL34 model and the Stealth. These are cool. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about the base model Mark II 5153 50 watt amp and why I love it to pieces, because it's freaking amazing. That's all I can say. The video is done. Buy it. It's awesome. All right, you're still here? Good. Here's the thing. Again, I've played a ton of amps. Back in the day, I used to play the PV 5150s, and I never really loved them, to be perfectly honest with you. And you'd like to think, hey, this thing, it's the same thing. It's a 5150, but it's not. These two amps do not sound the same whatsoever. And then on top of that, there's a whole lot of different flexibility and features, which we'll get into in a minute. But back in the day, I played 5150s. I even toured with Propane with a 5150, an old block letter, and man, it's just not the sound for me. I'm sorry. They're a little bit too brittle in the high end. They're a little bit too boomy in the low end, so they're super scooped, especially if you match it up with something like a Mesa cab. You're done. That's it. You're essentially playing a high gain bass amp. It's insane. But the EVH 5150 is nice and creamy. It has a warmth in the mid-range that is just mwah. But it took me a long time to figure that out. I mean, there were years and years and years that I kind of had no clue what I was looking for. I didn't even know what kind of amp I wanted or would enjoy playing. I just know that I needed something super high gain that when I palm muted, like, it sounded huge and gnarly. I didn't even care. Gain to 10. It took a long time to learn how to truly treat a nice tube amp. And I learned all of that through playing an EVH. So I had old PV 5150s. I used Line 6 amp modelers. I did all kinds of crazy stuff that all led me directly to this amp. Let's talk about some of the features. First of all, it's a 50 watt amp, which, yeah, it's not a 100 watt amp, but you know what? That's okay. I tour with this amp with Propane, and it's plenty loud. Would it be nice to have 100 watts? Sure, but this thing pulls off everything that you need it to pull off on a modern day stage. With decent monitoring systems and things like that, you are gonna have no trouble with this amp. It's gonna be plenty loud. Aside from that, it also features most of the standard things that you would find in an amp. Effects loop, it's got presence and resonance control so that you can tweak the extreme high end and the extreme low end, which is nice. It also has switchable impedance so that you can connect it to pretty much any cab you want. It has a headphone jack that will actually cut the signal going out to the cabinet so that you could just use headphones, which is an option if you need it. And then my absolute favorite feature, which no other amp on the market has, is the fact that this amp will learn what MIDI controller you're using in your rig, and it will follow the orders of that MIDI controller. The long and short of that, for those that have any understanding of how MIDI works, instead of controlling the MIDI controller device to tell the amp what to do because it's listening for certain control commands, the amp will actually just learn what position your MIDI controller is in, and you can save it to the amp that it recognizes that when you cue up that particular preset, boom, you've changed the channel on the amp. That's insane. But like I said, this thing is feature packed. It's got everything that you need to rock. And I mean rock, because this thing is a beast. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons. One of the best things about this amp is the fact that it's got such a compact size. Now, if anybody's seen the 100 watt, it's massive. It's literally the whole width of a guitar cabinet. Like, it's beefy. So it's really nice that this guy is a bit more compact while still packing all of the punch. It makes touring much easier because your footprint in the van or in the trailer is much smaller. Just the fact that it's not massive makes a huge difference in the portability and accessibility of this amp. The other thing, obviously, I can't stress it enough, the MIDI capability is just insane. So when you can build a rig around an amp and make sure that like it's gonna play nice with everything that you're doing, and you don't even need extra hardware, for instance like the amp gizmo or a ground control or whatever, like you don't need something extra to make this thing work. It just works with every MIDI controller you connect it to. Even if you don't have a MIDI controller, you could be using, for instance, like the Line 6 HX effects. This unit is just an effects unit, but it allows you to save scenes on the effects unit itself. And by changing scenes, you can program this head to change channels when you change scenes. Lastly is, of course, the sound. The sound! The sound, the tone! It's so heavy, man. It is so heavy, and yet it's still so clear. It has such a nice, smooth tonality to me while still being beefy and high gain. It's not too muddy, and it's also not too shrill. These are really important characteristics to me. You know, I don't want something that's so focused in the mid-range that I feel like I'm getting punched in the face every time I play my guitar, but I do want something that does fill that space sonically, and this amp does that very well. Okay, so now let's talk about a couple of things that aren't exactly perfect about this amp. And I definitely don't have too many gripes. But one of the things that in my opinion is kind of a bummer is the fact that the green channel and the blue channel are a shared channel, essentially. Now, in the previous versions of the 5150 50 watt, the Mark I, the green and blue channel were exactly the same channel, and they actually shared a volume and a gain knob. So that made those two things really kind of unusable in a lot of ways. Like, without boosting the clean channel with some kind of a compressor in your effects loop or this or that, there was like no way without modding the amp to get your clean channel to match the volume of the crunch channel or rhythm channel, which is the blue channel. There was no way to do that. I had an old Mark I 50 watt and it drove me crazy. On my pedal board I had a compressor just to make the clean channel louder so that it matched the sound of the blue channel when I switched between the two channels. There was just no way to do that. Some people started to mod their amps and they added dual-centric knobs on the volume and on the gain. And this was a complete game changer because then it literally turned it into a 3-channel amp. It made that one channel 2 separate channels. Now, the only thing, back to my gripe, is that it shares an EQ. There are ways to, again, mod it and have separate EQs for the two channels, but I'd prefer to leave my amp stock. Modding stuff, just always, first of all, it voids your warranty. Second of all, it definitely adds the potential for things to go wrong. So if you're a touring guy like me, maybe you want to just leave your amp stock unless you have like a professional working on it that's really going to make sure that those mods are installed correctly. But one really great thing is that EVH caught onto that and saw that people were doing that. And instead of people having to have their warranties voided, EVH just started to release amps that had dual-centric knobs on them. Stock. No extra charge, no nothing. This is just the new thing because it makes sense. When a company sees what people are doing in the community and they realize that this isn't working for people, and instead of just keeping the amp the same way and telling them, hey, EVH went ahead and updated the amp and gave it this feature so that people could use the amp better without voiding warranties. That's awesome. And my only other complaint is the fact that the power itself isn't switchable from 120 volts to 240 volts. So essentially US power and Euro power, which isn't such a big deal because I'm not going to be taking this thing on an airplane, because there are probably better options for flyout rigs that we can talk about in a future video. Alright, so we've talked about this thing enough. It's a great amp. Let's plug it in and let's see how it sounds. Alright, so that's the EVH 5153 50 watt Mark II guitar amplifier. I love it. I can't say enough good stuff about this amp. It is versatile, it sounds great, it's compact, and it's powerful. What else do you need in an amp? I implore you to go check one out for yourself. Give it a try, it might just be for you. I appreciate you stopping by, checking out this video. Hopefully it was helpful, hopefully you learned something about this amp. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, join this community, drop a comment down below, let me know what you think of this amp. If you've played it before, tell me about your experience, ask a question. I'm here to help. If you haven't already, do me a favor, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/madmanmusic, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Peace!